Music Not Diving is brought to you by Acid. Head over to ac55id.com to check out the fastest growing electronic music marketplace, the central hub for buying, selling, and streaming. You can also listen to podcasts over there, and they pay podcasters 1 cent per stream, which is completely unprecedented. Nowhere else does that. They also pay 1 cent per stream for all streaming on the platform. So the myth of 1 cent per stream is a reality over on AC55ID. They also have their own pressing plant, so if you're doing vinyl as a label, they can help you with that. And they can also press vinyl on demand. So you can take orders, press vinyl, and send them out directly. That's another pretty amazing thing. Head over to ac55id.com to check them out.
This is Music Not Diving with Scuba.
Welcome to the show. I'm Scuba. This is Music Not Diving. Okay, we are delving into the archive on this week's episodes. The Not a Diving podcast was the previous incarnation of this show, ran for 157 episodes, audio only though. So we have a deep catalogue to delve into, but like I said, some challenges to overcome with regards to presenting it on video. We think we've just about done that. So we're going to be doing some classic episodes over the course of the next few weeks, in addition to new episodes too, so don't worry about that. This week's episode is Tijana T. We originally broadcast this all the way back in March 2023. It was episode 60 of that podcast, and this is a really, really interesting conversation actually. Tijana is from Serbia. She's from Belgrade, deeply involved in the scene there. She's lived in Berlin though as well, and just been a very successful DJ around the European circuit. But more importantly, she has very, very informed opinions on the, I suppose, geopolitics around music and musicians. So this is a very, very interesting chat that gets into some unexpected areas, but areas which are very much worth delving into. So I think you're going to enjoy it. Just before we get into it, a reminder that you can support the show on Patreon, patreon.com/ScubaOfficial. There are 2 very reasonably priced tiers there, both of which get you bonus content. There are other ways you can support the show. If you check the show notes, there are some instructions on how you can possibly do that. But what we'd really like you to do though is just like this video, subscribe to the channel, and just get involved in any way you can. So without further delay, here is Tijana T.
Brought to you by AC55ID.
Tijana T, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm all right. A bit confused in Berlin. The weather is schizophrenic. Like in the last 15 minutes, it rained 2 times and it was like dark and sunny like 3 times. So.
Okay, I do have a first question that I had prepared, which was relating to your work as a journalist, because you have been a music journalist, and music journalism is something that we've talked about on the show quite a lot. So do you agree that the quality of music journalism has declined in the past, say, 15 years or so? 10, 15 years?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Mainly because, for me, I see it as a class problem, because I come from Serbia. It's already like quite an unprivileged position, and even there, I also come from the unprivileged background. I remember reading this article in 2005 already, where one journalist was saying how basically media, and especially like music media outlets, are paying journalists so poorly that basically the only people who can afford to do that job are people who have a good financial background from their family, let's say, which also gives a slightly... Yeah, it's just like a different perspective to everything, and I think that's the problem, that this like really diverse perspective is missing, and you have a lot of young people who don't need to do it, like they don't need to do it to support themselves, but they do it just for the image or for the lifestyle that it comes with, or to be like part of, the cool kids crew, like to work in a cool like media outlet and write about music and travel to festivals and attend concerts for free, which not necessarily always, but often disturbs some sort of like objective perspective. And I see that as a big problem, or one of the problems that led to the decline in music journalism. But I mean, journalism in general and what we consider like media, or what was traditional media, is in crisis. Not only, I wouldn't say it only happens in music journalism. I think it's in huge crisis in all aspects, like political or social journalism. Like a lot of the views are really biased. The whole public discourse is getting like really polarized, especially in the last years. And I mean, we also know how media is corrupt in subtle or less subtle ways. So it's a bit of like, that's what's happening. Like, it's the sign of our times. So I think media journalism is just like affected by it. And the problem is also that now with social networks and different ways that people communicate and that people want to absorb information, some forms of this music journalism seems to be obsolete, and I think media outlets somehow didn't find a way to address their new audience in a way that would be interesting, and that would be like interesting for younger readers or younger audiences, but at the same time relevant and serious and in depth. It's really hard. It's also like the generation the changes of generation, because like younger people have like, I guess their attention span is different. So like if you want to have like serious coverage and write something that is like heavily analyzed and like an in-depth article, for example, no one's going to read it. If no one reads it, like you don't have enough funds to support yourself, because no one wants to, advertise on your page or whatever. It's just this like loop of the times that we live in. If you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree. I agree that it's sometimes I read these articles, I read like reviews of the events that I attended or reviews of the music that I listened to, and I'm like, yeah, this is like so like I'm missing objectiveness, sometimes it's somehow
right.
Yeah, it's different.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots to unpack there to what you've just said, right? There's a few different things. I mean, just going back to your first point about the economic class of people who do this kind of journalism now, and I think this is kind of links to the broader point you were making about media, but I think this is particularly true in music because it's, as you said, like this is something which is perceived to be quote unquote cool, and it's something that people want to get in to do, but obviously the money in it is not what it once was, if there was ever any money in it, right? So do you think that the backgrounds of people who are writing about music, do you think that's contributed to the kind of lack of seriousness with which economic inequality is taken versus other sorts of inequality? Like there's a lot of talk in music writing about diversity and about privilege, but until very recently there's been very little discussion of economic class, and how that disadvantages people. So do you think that the issue about the backgrounds of the writers, do you think that's played into that?
Well, it plays into everything in life, so it must play into it. It's just it's just a different perspective. I've experienced it in my life, and it's actually, in all honesty, for me, very challenging to navigate this kind of this scene that I belong to or this industry, because I've never been able to learn about it in my own country. And also, I always feel like I'm just like, because of my background, really different from people that I encounter every day, almost on a daily basis. I just see that the problems they are focused on are problems that have nothing to do with me. It's just like all sorts of different sets of problems. So I'm pretty sure it plays into every perspective. Like a perspective to life, a perspective to music, perspective to events, perspective to experiences. It's just a filter that we have different filters through which we perceive things. It's not same if we've talked, as you mentioned, it cannot be the same for like a queer person of color coming from a suburb somewhere and someone who is like a white privileged person living in a 16th century family house in Belgium. It's just not the same perspective. I'm sorry. So it, and then I would say that for both sides, it takes a lot of effort to broaden this perspective and to really understand, to really develop sensitivity and empathy to just broaden this perspective. Yeah. It takes effort on both sides. Even like people who skip class, who manage to somehow escape the class that they were born into, it takes a lot of adaptation and a lot of work to accept this new reality, and the vice versa. Like for people who do come from by luck and birth privileged backgrounds, it takes a lot of work for them to broaden their perspective.
Yeah, absolutely does. And, as you were saying there are the kind of levels and varieties of privilege that people experience, right? And so, it's possible to be of, this is best summed up in intersectionality, right? And when that's properly applied, it's a way of sort of assessing the relative levels of privilege that people experience. So you can be a rich person of color, right? And you can be a poor white person,
exactly.
Right? And those two things are, have different nuances to them, right? And I think like the tendency that certainly I've observed is there is a kind of like white middle class Western European bias, and I've just described myself there, by the way. So there is that sort of, I think, bias to coverage generally, and just kind of the attitudes which are kind of taken up. But then the kind of flip side of that is the kind of, I guess I describe it as the kind of guilty side of that identity. Right. And, then there is some kind of overcompensation towards certain types of privilege. So we've talking about, I guess, the most obvious one, I think, in dance music has been like gender disparities, but also disparities with people of color on, labels and lineups and all the rest of it. But the whole thing seems to be flavored by this kind of middle class, white, Western European / North American undercurrent. Is that something that when you said the people that you find yourself interacting with on a day-to-day basis, is that the kind of thing you were getting at?
Not necessarily. Yes, it's just this. It's just this white Western European / North American / Australian white mid-class. This is, I've been telling, I have a lot of friends in Detroit, for example, and they're all people of color. And I have to say, I have better understanding with these guys, and we share a lot more in common that I would share with a white person from a Western European country. I mean, okay, I'm white. Obviously,
right.
I have never experienced racial disadvantages or discrimination. But at the same time, like where my geographical background or socio-political background is something that puts me in a completely different category. And I have certain systemic disadvantages or like systemic problems which I'm facing, and they are much closer to what people of color are facing sometimes. You know, once I show my passport, for example, at any border, especially borders to Western Europe, I'm not treated the same way as someone who would show a European passport. It's just the questions I'm being asked, the way I'm being treated, the tone of the voice changes immediately. so right. Yeah, this is and also like the way I grew up, the problems I had to overcome. For me, growing up in Belgrade and deciding to be a DJ at the time when there was maybe like 1 or 2 female DJs in that city was wow. It was I mean, the problems I had, I just never experienced any kind of support. I was asking my friends who were, or at least they were my DJ friends until that moment when I decided to become a DJ. I would ask them to show me how to use equipment or to show me some tricks, how to like mix or to just explain how to mix. And they just didn't want to. Like, and they were, I mean, so much harassment, so much online harassment, so much hatred. And it went on and on for 10 years. I actually had some recognition in my country only after a few years of touring internationally and having 100 gigs per year all over the world and playing all the major festivals, clubs, and blah, blah, blah. And it was then that some people finally were like, okay, we can show a certain amount of respect. You know, but this is and then I'm looking at like people who are, you know, DJs, and they were born and raised in Western European countries, and they have like always, you know, you just, let's say like in London or Berlin, even Paris, like you have 5 different shops where you can buy equipment. You have record shops. You have this crew, this label, that label, a bunch of people who are into it. People are more supportive in general. I just feel like, wow, like what I had to go through has nothing to do with the problems that these other people are facing. Also, let's say in a country like mine, the whole perspective to music and to events is really pure passion, because there is no business there. There is no industry there. No one can make a living or can make a career out of, let's say, being a DJ. So people who are into it and people who do it, they really do it only because they love it. And for me, this whole like industry perspective and the business games and moves and career steps, correct ones or incorrect ones, that's all like one big mystery. Like, I mean, now I've learned, but it was just overwhelming when I stepped into this world. I was like, oh, wow, it took me years to even accept that it's possible to be successful. Like, it's actually possible to be successful. So,
right.
So I'm giving you examples on how, like, sorry to interrupt once again. I'm just giving you examples on how my perspective to, let's say, events and DJing is different than, let's say, yours. You're born in UK, so it's a country of, you know, music, electronic music, events, festivals, careers, big DJs, media that supports this kind of music, it cannot be the same, you know?
Absolutely. Okay, so I had like 50 questions, like as you were saying all that. I'm going to return to something that you said in the middle there about getting recognition in your own country, because this is something we talked about last week with Eric Clute regarding the recognition or not that the first and second wave Detroit producers and DJs did or didn't receive, or more didn't receive until much later. And the concept of acceptance in your own town or your own, community, I guess. So, and then another question which popped into my head as you were saying that was, getting support from within your own, I guess, network and your own kind of social group and your own community and your own, scene, I guess. So, like, can you sort of expand a little bit more on those two things? Like, how do you see like the scene? And I want to ask you about like a more general development question about the scene in Serbia. But in your own experience of becoming successful, like how did that kind of interact with your local community?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is also something I talked about with my friends from Detroit and also Chicago. One of my friends here in Berlin is Alinka. She comes from Chicago, and we're also the same generation, so we were sharing our experiences about this whole issue, like when I became a DJ, it was absolutely it was unacceptable that you cannot mix. Like everything had to be like flawless. And my kind of like development went the other way around. People first started booking me to be a DJ before I even became a DJ. So I was learning how to do it in front of like full clubs and parties. I was learning how to be a DJ and learning how to mix and how to use the equipment in front of an audience. But I was like brave enough to do it. And this is also something I saw like in these early days in Berlin. I've seen a lot of DJs who are now big DJs, big names, in their beginnings, but people were more supportive. They would tell you like, oh, maybe you can't hear well. This is how you adjust the monitors, or this is how you do this or that. And, they would kind of like help you. Whereas in Belgrade, it would be like, oh, she's a shit DJ. She only gets booked because she's a woman. And then all the gossips that I'm sleeping with promoters. And I mean, it went on even when I started touring everywhere. It's like this whole thing, like, yeah, she's sleeping around. And then another friend, a female DJ, told me, do they really think that we have time to sleep with 100 different promoters per year? So, yeah, I mean, I had some people who supported me. And in the beginning, and these were, I would say, the originators or like older generation of people, of DJs and promoters in Belgrade. And I'm very thankful that they supported me. But then my own generation and my own kind of crew, I didn't feel such a big support. And it was very confusing because I was doing music TV shows and radio shows, and it was also like considered as some sort of vanity, like what does she want now? Isn't it enough that she's on TV? Now she wants to be a DJ as well. I had a feeling they treated me a lot as if I'm taking their place, or taking their part of the cake, and this is their God-given right to be in this position. No one else. And then, I mean, I've seen it with other girls as well, like in the last years, I've noticed some girls in Belgrade who are, one is a painter, the other one is a fashion designer, and they were always at parties. They really know music. They were supporting amazing local DJs. And then the moment they decided to make their own parties and DJ themselves, those same DJs that they supported turned their back on them and started like talking shit behind their back. So it's like, as a woman, you're fine as long as you're a dancer or as long as you stay behind the DJ. But once you decide to be in this position, the support is gone and the gossip starts and all the nastiness. Obviously, it's changing. Like, it's not the same as it was not even like 6 years ago. But yeah, this is, I think, one of the reasons why I kind of pushed it and decided to do something and to like break out internationally is just to show them. It was like, okay, I'm gonna prove myself, I'm gonna prove them wrong, I'm gonna do something that no one ever did. So it was also, I mean, I'm that kind of character, so it was for me also a kind of a fuel to move on. But yeah, in general, I think one of the reasons the scene is not developing there is that people are more gossipy than they are supportive, even between men. So it's not only a problem with girls. And the other problem is that it's such a poor environment that, it's not profitable at all. And there's no support whatsoever. You cannot apply for a fund for your project and then whatever, like the Ministry of Culture will give you some money or some private fund will have funds for projects. There's nothing you can apply for. So there's like no support unless you are really wealthy and somehow you're interested in music or electronic dance music, and then you can invest your own money. But in Serbia, people who are in that position are not interested in this kind of music or this kind of scene. So that's the reason why it's not developing. And I think that also obviously creates a lot of resentment, a lot of anger. Also, like now that we see everything on Instagram, everything on internet, people in countries or environments like mine are even more aware of this unfairness, this like disadvantage that comes with basically luck by birth, and I think I'm not blaming anyone. I understand why people can feel frustrated and then be mean to others. So I get it, and I think it's the same story in Chicago or Detroit, as you mentioned. And for me, actually, I was really hunting for an international agent for a few years, and I tried different agents and agencies here in Berlin. And joining Dystopian agency really helped. Like, that was the moment when I started touring, because they were a really good agency with great contacts and amazing DJs. And for them, my story, being from Serbia, being like a woman from Serbia, was interesting and inspiring. And yeah, they were able to, push me a little bit, but I was so ready because I was DJ for already 10 years and I was super experienced because I DJ'd. I mean, in Serbia, I built my reputation as an all night long DJ. So for years, I was almost exclusively playing at least 8 to 9 hours on weekends. So I was already quite an experienced DJ when I joined Dystopian. So it was, it happened like really fast. The moment they took me on, I started touring. I started like every festival, every club they offered me to, they said yes. And after I played, they all started inviting me back. So I was like super ready. So it was actually, and this is the first time that's when I started feeling really confused, because I just couldn't believe that people treat you with respect. Like you travel around and you're like surrounded with like bunch of guys. You come to a club and people treat you with respect. So yeah, that was like another chapter, like getting used to actually having support.
Okay, so lots of talk about the Belgrade scene there, and obviously it's like Serbia, like in the course of like both of our last
sorry, I actually need to interrupt you, and I want to say something positive actually, the scene in Belgrade is extremely inspiring because of this tension. Because like everyone is kind of like in this hustle mode. It's not comfortable. And I think this is also sometimes a good drive, like a good motivation. And I have to say, still some of my favorite artists and some of my favorite DJs ever are people who are like local DJs in Belgrade. And the reason for that is that they exactly what makes them frustrated, and that is that they cannot have, or they don't have equal opportunities as people in, let's say, Western Europe. Like it's almost, as I said, it's almost impossible to make it a career. So people really do it out of honest interest and love for music. And this is another thing that I think plays a role in the perspective to events and music. And this is why they're so good, because they are not calculating. There's like no calculation to be made. So it's really inspiring. And there's a bunch of DJs there and a bunch of places. Belgrade is actually famous for its nightlife. For a long, long time, that city and that country had nothing else to offer except for good fun, like for great times in clubs in Belgrade. And, the vibe was also... So we're living in a constant stage of crisis. So for people, it's extremely important to go out because this is where they feel relaxed. This is where they can let go. This is where they are, surrounded with other bodies and, feel this like human connection. So this escape is actually necessary. And since everything is so unstable and, in countries like that, the apocalypse is always around the corner, every party is like the last one, So I have to say that it's not really like when you're there and when you're experiencing parties and DJs and festivals in Belgrade, it's actually very, very special, and the energy is amazing. It's just that, building a career or being in the scene and developing yourself as an artist or making any kind of a plan for yourself within that scene is really, really hard, close to impossible.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I can totally see that. And actually, as you were making that point about how, the idea about any party being the last one really reminded me of playing in Seoul, actually in South Korea, and just being in an environment where like there's just hundreds of like weapons pointed at a place just gives people, it's just a slightly different outlook on life generally, and then that translates through into parties, which I guess is kind of the kind of thing you were getting at there. But I mean, my question was going to be a little bit more sort of general about the development of the scene in Belgrade, because I mean, obviously, like 2 wars in the 90s and just unbelievable like turmoil in the region generally. I mean, growing up in that, I mean, you've touched, you've kind of hinted at like what growing up through that kind of a period was like. But I mean, as you were kind of beginning to go out and beginning to go to parties yourself, before, like long before you started DJing, like what was the scene like in Belgrade during that kind of a period? Like what were the parties like there?
The parties were amazing. They were the best ever. And I thought actually I'm maybe romanticizing this because I was very young. I started going out with my uncle who was bringing me to the parties with him, and my parents would allow me to go. So I was 13 when I started going to parties, and the parties were phenomenal. And I somehow later on I convinced myself that I romanticized it. But now when I'm a bit more mature and a lot more experienced, I realized that it wasn't romanticizing, because I went to a few places where I experienced similar energy, and I did connect that with the political situation or political circumstances or historical moment. And these experiences in these countries a lot later reminded me of Belgrade And I was like, yes, this is how it was. Like, this is exactly how it was. And it was a confirmation for me that it really was fantastic. It wasn't romanticizing. And the places where I had this extremely similar feeling or experience was Georgia. It was Tbilisi, in Bassiani, in their first year, in the beginning of their year, and it was of their club, and it was exactly the same vibe that I remember from the 90s and early 2000s in Belgrade. And the other place where I had that feeling was Kiev, obviously in the years leading to the war or prior to the war. So I realized that this whole political context plays a big role on how the parties will look like. And in the 90s, I mean, it was wild. The country was involved in multiple wars, as you said. We had war on our territory by the end of the 90s, but throughout the whole 90s, Serbia was in war. And refugees are constantly arriving, and young people were constantly leaving the country. Whoever could leave the country left, and young men were being mobilized, often, during the night, just taken out of bed and sent to war. So there were these were some intense times. I mean, I found out recently from an older friend of mine who was in the 90s. She was in her 20s. And she told me, we had a lot of our friends, guys, who would actually go out at night and party all night to escape the military. Because they were they were hunting them during the night. So they would basically spend all the nights partying and then sleeping over at, random friends or girlfriends, just hiding from their own homes, because they knew that if they go home, the military will catch them and send them to war. So, that's speaking about different perspectives to party and to music journalism. I mean, for us, talking about music journalism is already a luxurious position. For me to comment on Western musical journalism, I feel like I'm in a very luxurious position. I have luxurious problems, so that's how it was in the 90s, and the everyday
So can I interrupt you there? I want to dig a little deeper into what the scene was like on a sort of, I guess, a kind of infrastructure kind of basis, right? Because you said just there, music journalism is sort of seen through that kind of lens of Mixmag and whatever, But obviously, each individual scene has its own, I guess, like I said, what infrastructure is the word I used behind it. And so how are you finding out about parties, and what were the kind of, I guess, the back end sort of stuff that kind of linked the various different bits of the scene together? And I'm guessing most of the DJs that were playing were local, but and then you probably had the odd sort of international come through too. But just tell me a little bit more about how the whole scene kind of came together, different parts.
I was about to start with that part. So basically, it's important to understand this historical or political context. Yugoslavia, the country that existed until 1990, was not part of the Eastern Bloc. So it was an Eastern European country, communist, socialist country, but it was not part of the Eastern Bloc. It was the only Eastern European country that was not under the influence of USSR. That country actually had good connections with the West and with the East and with the rest of the world, let's say what we these days call Global South. So people in Yugoslavia lived a very free life. We had Levi's jeans, Coca-Cola, all of those things that people in Eastern Europe were longing for. So we had it. And we had like American movies shown on TV, Italian TV programs, German programs, French independent movies or whatever. So culturally, Yugoslavia was a very open country. Belgrade was and still is the biggest city in that area, and it was very cosmopolitan. Yugoslavian passport would allow you to travel anywhere around the world without any visa issues. So with Yugoslavian passport, you could travel to US, to Western Europe. You could also go to USSR. You could go to Brazil, to China, to Japan, to Africa, everywhere without any restrictions. So people lived a very cosmopolitan life in Belgrade in the 80s, let's say. And 80s were really amazing years, especially for music and for alternative music in Belgrade. Fast forward to 1990, all of this stops and the war starts and the country is all of a sudden blocked under international sanctions, isolated. No one can go out, no one can get in, there is no import. It's very hard to get any kind of information, and people in Serbia especially, generally people in Balkans were referred to as, crazy savages who just started this civil war. We were almost treated as like wild tribes. But especially in Serbia, so we were like bad guys at that time, and we were sanctioned for it. So a lot of people who were, let's say, in their 20s back then, I think just didn't want to accept this idea. Like they didn't want to accept that now all of a sudden we are punished and we need to live like different kind of life. So these are the people who were these were the people who built the scene. They had some experiences in the 80s, and then in the 90s they just continued, and they just like made every possible effort to keep up with the trends, to follow whatever is happening musically. And it was, you would have some relatives who are living somewhere abroad, and they would send you magazines. For example, my uncle that I mentioned, he left country when he left country in 1990, I think, and he lived in Denmark. And every week he was sending me a box full of tapes, cassettes, where he would record. He was buying and collecting CDs, and he would record all the new CDs to tapes, and he would put it on a bus, and a bus was driving from Copenhagen to Belgrade, and I would get like every week or every 2 weeks I would get a box full of cassettes, and this is how I knew about the new albums and new music. And I guess some people also individually had connections like this. Or, for example, DJs obviously could not buy records because there were no record shops in Serbia because there was no import. So they would find connections in certain airlines that were still flying internationally. So they would order records, and then the stewardess or the pilot would bring them. It was just all sorts of ways to get it. Same with magazines. And there were these were all individual efforts. And I guess some people were also importing magazines. I'm not even sure if that was legal, but there were certain shops where you could buy Enemy or Mojo, or you could buy even like Mix Mag or DJ Mag. Not many copies, but there were periods where you could also get those magazines. But people really, really strived and really didn't want to accept this new reality, and they really like tried to pretend and live their life as if they are part of the world, as if they were not excluded from the world. And this is also how parties started happening, because this is also the time when, raves were developing everywhere around the world, and the DJ culture, started really developing a lot. So I guess, locally people wanted to just keep up with what's happening. But also I would say that these raves or parties played a big role, because at that moment in time, it was really necessary for people to have it. And it was a genuine, very genuine, very natural development of the scene, because there was a need. There was like a psychological need for it. And there were a few DJs that were also connected to several radio stations, independent radio stations in Belgrade. And they would somehow connect with labels around Europe. And they would get like promos from these labels sent to them. And then they play this music on the radio. And they also hosted their own parties. So this is kind of... this is the vibe. This is how it happened. And then already by the end of 90s, it was really well developed. I mean, you had the good thing about those times is that there were parties everywhere around Serbia, not just in Belgrade. So every town had like their own party. Trance was really popular. So even in like very small towns and villages, you would have like trance fans and trance parties. Obviously local DJs. And I mean, they didn't have fresh records always. So, you know, if you would follow your favorite DJ, you would have to listen to the same tracks all over and all over again. But it was, I don't know, it was fun. And then the government changed in 2000 and the whole system changed and the country became open. And that was also an opportunity for sponsors to jump in, because they realized that this party movement is quite developed, and it's almost like it was actually almost mainstream in Serbia. Like this electronic music was at that moment kind of like mainstream. So when the country opened, a lot of sponsorships happened, and then all these parties became like really huge, because they had support from cig tobacco companies or beers or whatever, and then it developed in more like commercial direction in the next 10 or 20 years.
Okay, so like the question that was popping into my head as you were saying all that was, you know, the history of the political history of the 90s in Europe generally is, post the Cold War, coming out of the Cold War and the end of history and essentially coming together. But then obviously, you know, what happened in Yugoslavia is the complete polar opposite of that. And the wars that were happening were civil wars, basically. So, I mean, you know, acid house and, you know, the development of dance music culture is all kind of, well, the kind of cliches around all that is people coming together. So, you know, living in a place where people are fighting each other, like how does that affect like the people's mentality around it? I mean, I'm guessing that, you know, there must have been a rejection of those sorts of forces, but can you talk a little bit about how that kind of coloured the experience of the dance scene in the various states in Yugoslavia? Obviously your experience in Serbia, but yeah, tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I have to say that now it's actually a very well-known fact that these civil wars were not really civil wars. Obviously, it was the politicians and in some cases also the church who played a big role in starting these wars. It wasn't the people who said we don't want to live with each other. It was the politicians who said we don't want to collaborate with each other and we don't want to be the same country anymore. And I have to say that in the majority of these countries that formed Yugoslavia, people were against the war. And especially, I mean, I cannot speak for other countries because I haven't been able to visit and experience what it was and how it was in, let's say, Croatia. Bosnia is like the worst, the saddest story ever. But in Serbia, everyone was protesting against this war. People were not like for it. We had protests against the president and the government that led us into war since 1991 until 2000. People were protesting almost every day. For several years, these protests were so massive that you had hundreds of thousands of people on the street every day. Unfortunately, this did not stop the war because from my experience and what I know, people have no say in wars. Like, it's not, the wars are never people's wars. So when someone else decided, or like when higher forces decided that this war will stop, it stopped. So what was bringing the people together at parties is exactly this. It's opposing this. People were coming together in being against it. They were not, they were not coming together in hatred. They were actually coming together in fighting against this hatred, at least in Belgrade. I know for sure that people who went to parties are the same people who went to protests against the war. And as I said, some of them were actually escaping going to war by going to parties. So, it's more this... I think it's like in these times we can also call it trauma bonding. It's like I guess people were bonding in this collective trauma much more than anything else. So it was, yes, as you said, in the 90s, Europe was celebrating, unity and coming together and forming the European Union. And in Yugoslavia, the story was complete opposite. And it was very traumatizing. So I know for sure that like a lot of people in Serbia were just really sorry that it happened. They didn't want it. And even now when I've actually started writing an essay about Yugoslavia and the cultural heritage of that era. And I did a lot of research and I read some statistics. And a few years ago, a huge statistical research was finished where they asked an enormous number of people all around ex-Yugoslavia if they are happier now than they were happier back then, and if they believe that the wars were justified or not, and if they would like Yugoslavia to come back together or not. And the statistics are interesting. In Serbia, I think like 60% of the people or more, definitely more than 60% of the people say that they had it better in Yugoslavia and they would like Yugoslavia to, be together and the wars were unjustified. In Bosnia, it's 80-something% of the people. So that's the country which had the worst and the bloodiest and the most terrible wars. So basically, almost everyone in that country believes that wars shouldn't have happened at all. So it wasn't like this full-on hatred and mode around. Yeah, it was more just a shock and trauma for everyone.
Yeah, I can understand that.
So as I said, I think as I said multiple times, I think those parties were necessary because first of all, it was a response to a complete disintegration of formal and high culture in our country, because the whole country collapsed. Everything collapsed. Every element of society and infrastructure collapsed, and so did the culture and cultural life. So this, let's call it rave culture, was some sort of counterculture. It was a culture that people wanted to build as a response to this collapse. They wanted to build their own culture. And so that's one part. The other part is that, as we all know, and it's been written and talked about a lot. Like when you're there dancing for hours, it really releases certain hormones that are necessary for survival. And especially if you're going through a trauma, I'm pretty sure that people instinctively felt this is something they need to do to keep their sanity. And I mean, I have to say the sanest people I know are those who attended parties back then and who just did not want to, they didn't want to cooperate with this everyday darkness, that was coming with like daytime. So they lived at night. And then another aspect of these parties is, as I said, people coming together. It was really a natural reaction to this forced dividedness of people in this war. So people were trying to find every possible way to actually come together.
Okay, so you mentioned earlier that Serbia in particular was kind of painted in the international press as the quote-unquote bad guys throughout this period. And that's kind of sort of bled over into the current situation with Russia. I mean, just last week, like Novak Djokovic's dad and all that kind of stuff, that sort of unsavory kind of stuff, right? And there is this kind of image, I think, that Serbia has probably, probably unfairly to some extent anyway. So what is it like though for you personally trying to represent a country with such a difficult past, but also quite a sort of like a difficult present as well, actually, in the way that the country is perceived internationally?
Well, it's not easy. Luckily, like my conflicts are more internal than external. But as I said, it's just that, I don't know, over the years when I'm like traveling, let's say, and then I come and sometimes promoters or other DJs at the dinner, they are not aware where I come from. And then they ask me and I say I'm from Serbia. And I've never experienced a normal reaction. Like, you're from Serbia, okay. And then we go on with the conversation. It's always like these, right. These sounds. Oh, wow. Wow.
But I think that's partly because it's an interesting region, right? And people are curious, I think, reasonably enough, right?
I have to say, I see that people are honestly surprised. And then, I had to ask myself always, why are they so surprised? Of course, they're surprised because they haven't met a single or almost any other DJ from that country. But I also have the feeling that somehow in their minds, I'm not, and I want to say I'm not blaming anyone here. This is just how, as I said in the beginning, it's just like a different perspective to life, and a different perspective to the world and whatever is shown to you in the news and media and blah, blah, blah. So, but I guess like a lot of, especially Western Europeans, simply do not expect people from this country to travel a lot or to even be in a position to be a DJ. This is reserved for someone else. But this, it's like subconsciously, of course, like not consciously and not in a, in a bad way. I just understand that people's perception is formed under the influence of whatever is offered to them in terms of information. So yeah, it's not easy. I have to say I have a soft spot for Djokovic because I completely understand what he's going through. And it hasn't been easy for him. Like he also, it's like his rivals were people who come from Switzerland and Spain. And it's a known, right. Like for centuries, tennis was like this sport reserved for white higher class.
Yeah, it's an aristocratic pursuit, right? And Roger Federer just seems like an aristocrat himself.
Yeah,
right?
So and I understand why he's this like bad boy, and I understand his own rage and his own he also has, internal conflicts, and he also feels like he has to fight against the whole world sometimes, which is partly true, partly it just comes from his own perspective. So I totally understand that. And yeah, it hasn't been easy, because I also feel like some things are quite unfair. I mean, look at the history of Germany and the crimes that Germany committed against humanity. And somehow this country was like 20 years after the war, 30 years after the war, it was well off again. It was fine. It was functioning. Their citizens were able to live normal lives. Infrastructure was built back. Their passports were okay. And I have the feeling like in my country, like this sort of like natural amnesty that happens after every war never happened. It's like we are to blame forever. We're like guilty forever for whatever crimes happened or did not happen. And I have to say, it's like, I'm not taking any sides. I don't think that my country, or I don't even know what a country means. This entity is a made up thing. I can't even speak in the name of my country, because I'm not sure like in which name am I talking on behalf of the citizens of Serbia? Am I talking on behalf of the political elites, or you know what I mean? I just can't, like, it's very confusing, all of this, because what the governments are doing is often not reflecting what people want, or what people would do if they had a say. And yeah, now I got confused, but I would say like for me, the hardest thing is to try to explain it to people if they ask me sometimes, like you're asking now, because all of these issues are so deep and so complex. And until recently, people in the, let's say, Western world had absolutely no understanding of any kind of complexity and nuances in any conflict or in politics, because they were not so involved, they were not so informed. And I have to say, in the recent years, like the general public has become more interested in politics in the West, I mean, and more criticizing. And it probably happened because a lot of information is leaking on the internet. So everyone has access to information, to different kind of information, but also because I would say the Western world is in huge crisis now, which was, a big eye-opener for a lot of people. And for me now, it's much easier to explain some things, because people understand that, the politics of a government don't really reflect what the citizens of this country feel or experience. And actually what happens in Serbia, what is happening in Serbia in the last 30 years, and this is also something that I think is happening in Russia right now, is that the government is working directly against the interest of their own people. So it's always just an interest of the political elites and their friends. And their relatives, whatever. I mean, no one, like in Serbia, no one had any interest in these wars, and no one has any interest in this like constant state of crisis. No one has any interest. I'm speaking about like ordinary people. Like the quality of life is just getting lower and lower and lower. So for me, that was the biggest challenge. It wasn't like. Of course, when you come from a country like that, you also develop, I'm pretty sure I'm quite paranoid as well. Sometimes I may be exaggerating people's reactions, or sometimes I'm interpreting it in a negative or like different way, just because I'm aware of where I come from and what the general perception of my country is. But that's like one side of the story. The other one is trying to explain the complexity of everything, which is even like a much harder task. And it's very similar to what's happening now between Ukraine and Russia, and it's very unfortunate. And for all of us in ex-Yugoslavia, this ongoing war is re-traumatizing. I've noticed that all of my friends here in Berlin who come from Croatia, who come from Bosnia, who come from Serbia, just don't want to get involved. They're like, please leave us alone. We had enough wars in our life. We cannot get involved in this one too. So it's like highly re-traumatizing because it's very, very similar to what happened in our countries. Like a lot, there's too many similarities, except that now with Russia and Ukraine, the interests are much higher and much bigger. And obviously, Russia is a way more powerful country than any of Yugoslavian countries ever was. And it plays a different role in international political game. And obviously, Ukraine has some extremely valuable resources that are of high interest to also the other side of global elites. So it's even more complex, and it's going to be even harder to stop this war, I think. But it's very similar.
Sure, yeah. I mean, just going back to what you were saying there about the engagement of people, and I think young people specifically in the West, like Western Europe, North America, I think there is definitely sort of like the interest in this sort of stuff goes in waves, but I think generally there is a tendency to be very black and white about it, to be very simplistic, and I don't think there's much appetite for any sort of nuance really. I'm just thinking back to, for example, the opposition against the Iraq war, and then that bleeding into what happened around the financial crisis, and then into the Trump presidency, and all these kind of catalogue of pretty difficult events on a number of different levels, and the various waves of interest that came up around those events. But the tendency amongst the general public, and I think the young people especially, just to kind of see it as a black and white issue, whatever it is. This is something, either we're against it or we're on one side of this argument basically. And the way that the current conflict, talking about the war in Ukraine, and how various different countries and identities fall down on which side, I think people do see it in that kind of adversarial black and white kind of a way. But as you were kind of just touching upon, there is all sorts of issues, overlapping issues to this stuff, right? And it's not really that helpful just to say, well, this is bad and this is good, even if you can sort of broadly just describe what Russia is doing as being bad, quote unquote bad, right? I mean, there is a lot more to it than that.
Definitely. I mean, I would agree. But as I said, when we also talked about music journalism in the beginning of a conversation, I think this is also a generational thing, this polarizing. And it translates to many different issues and topics. Also, the issues surrounding I don't know, Black Lives Matter movement, identities, queer, blah, blah. It's all not nuanced. It's all it's always black and white. And this is also what, and this comes, I'm pretty sure that this is a result of this very raw and not complex communication that happens online. So Twitter or Facebook or Instagram are not places where you can have conversations, serious conversations. These are not places where you can present your arguments in a productive way. People there communicate in a style that is very unproductive, and it leads to this. It leads to polarization. It's here's this new thing that we are fighting for. Oh, great. Yeah, let's do it. And then someone asks a question. And the moment you ask a question, you're like, oh, you're against us. To put it simple, but this is all just internet conversation. This is Twitter conversation. In real life, I'm pretty sure it would not happen like that. And I'm also like, I can't really say if what we read in the news or what we see as conflicts or conversations online, I can't really say if this is something that translates in reality. If in real life these people really believe that, and if this same conversation, if it would be moved in real life, would look like that. And it's weird, confusing times, I have to say. But as for like Russia and Ukraine, it's definitely very, very complex. I mean, first of all, people in the Western world don't understand what it means to really not have freedom of speech. People do not understand that. They do not understand what it means to live in a dictatorship. They also don't understand what it means to live in a system where human life is really not valued at all. Where you actually, like, people in the West are born and raised in countries where they feel comfortable, they feel free, they feel that their life is valued, they have certain rights. Their constitution and their system guarantees those rights. And Russia is not one of those countries. And people are treating citizens of Russia as if they don't live under the circumstances that they live in. They expect the citizens of Russia to do something they cannot do. I mean, as I said, in Belgrade or in Serbia, we were protesting against the war for 10 years. Hundreds of thousands of people in every city. The war did not stop. So, and we're talking about, so everyone is saying that their president is crazy. Oh, Putin is crazy. Okay. But no one understands that there are millions of people who are ruled by this crazy person. You know what I mean? It's like they expect this, like the West expects the citizens of Russia to do something that even themselves would not be ready to. I mean, how many times the government in UK go into a war somewhere in the Middle East, and did the citizens of UK try to stop that war? Did they manage to? And we are talking about like a free democratic society. And now people
Sure.
of this, like people are expecting someone in Russia who can just disappear overnight if they, raise their voice, to go out in the streets and fight against Putin and blah, blah, blah. It's just not something they can do. Like, it takes a lot. Even if they are able to leave the country, they will still have like friends and relatives who stay there. And then they can have a hard time, or they can disappear, end up in jail, they can be tortured, wherever. This is what's happening. This is reality in that country. I mean, I talked to a few people who left Russia in the last 1 year, and they told me what they experienced after they went out on the protests. They told me what happened after they wrote something publicly on internet. They told me what happened to their family. And it wasn't only their parents, it was also their grandmas, grandpas, aunts, sisters, brothers. Like, how many people are ready to sacrifice everything? Not many. It's not easy.
Yeah, I think that there's a ridiculous assumption that somehow, like you say, like this, that you can just make a statement without there being this sort of implications for it, for your personal life and the lives of your family. It's absurd. We've talked about it on the show previously about, like the sort of the obligations that are put on, just using Russia as an example, like the obligations that are put on Russian artists to make some kind of public statement, in a way which is just
so presumptive, without a second thought.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say those people who, I would like to see those people who are creating this atmosphere, are putting pressure on these Russian artists. I would like to see them risk their families' lives for saying something online. I mean, they never never ask themselves, would I be able to do this under these circumstances? Because people, I think
Sure.
it's a very critical moment in society, in Western society these days, and a lot of people feel there's like a lot of things are changing constantly, and I think a lot of people are kind of like losing it, but they cannot understand why they're so confused, and they have this like internal anger that they need to direct towards someone. And of course, if someone offers you an enemy, you will, like if the enemy is there, it's written everywhere. Okay, here, if you hate anyone, this is the person you can hate now. If you want to hate anyone, this is the person that is like a legitimate target. Everyone will be like, oh, great, amazing. I'm going to just direct my anger towards this person and will not ask further questions why I actually have this anger in me. It's also like it's very deep, and it's very, very complex. But what I want to say is that I'm actually completely against sanctions and isolations and cultural isolations, because they always prove to be counterproductive. And even the United Nations have a bunch of reports on countries that had international sanctions and countries that were isolated. And it was always the same storyline in every of these countries. They would just get more right-wing, more xenophobic, more racist, more nationalist. When you exclude people and when you isolate them and when you direct this international hatreds towards them, the only reaction you will get is hatred, like more hatred. So I know for fact that this happened in Serbia. Nationalism in Serbia is higher than any time before, because now you have like generations and generations and generations of people who are born in an environment in which they're aware that the outside world hates them. Like we are not accepted, we are not loved, no one wants us. Okay, fuck them. I will hate them too. And I will hate the foreigners, and I will hate the European Union, and I will hate everyone who's different. I will hate the refugees from Syria. You know what I mean? So it's actually always much better to approach it with love and understanding and tolerance. But unfortunately, in this international political game, it's not possible. And what I'm trying from my position and my experience is at least to talk to people that are open to hearing my experience and just explain them why this is not a good approach. And I've been telling that to everyone since this war in Ukraine started. I've been talking to a lot of my Ukrainian friends as well, is that if you accept that there is an enemy, and if you accept that you need to hate and fight against, this is, and if you spread this hate, this is actually the moment when you allowed yourself for the war to win. Then the war win. Then we're all in war. And when you're challenged with a situation like that, I would say it's extremely important to invest all the efforts to let love win and just react. Although it's really hard, especially for Ukrainians, it's almost, you cannot ask that from them because their country is under attack and, their family members are dying or whatever. But if they can find some traces of love and understanding towards the other side, that would be a better reaction, because this shows that you're not allowing this war to win.
Yeah, it's extremely difficult. Let me just ask you a question though, like adjacent to this.
And I just want to say, like, going back to our topic about Yugoslavia and Yugoslavian wars and the music scene and all of that, throughout the 90s, people in Croatia were listening to Serbian music, and people in Serbia were listening to Croatian music, and everyone was still listening to the same Yugoslavian songs in a language that we all understand. And I have to say, once the war stopped, the first people who crossed the border, and they actually were not even technically allowed to cross the border. So the border between Serbia and Croatia was closed. No one could go. So a band that was the first to perform had to go through Hungary and Austria in order to reach the neighboring country, Croatia, and perform there. So the first people who crossed that border and went there were musicians. So,
sure. Okay. My question was going to be sort of adjacent to this. Like, we talked about how difficult it is for, using the example of Russian artists, but just from a purely kind of artistic perspective, do you think that making some sort of political statement generally is important from artistically, I mean?
No, it doesn't have to be. No, I actually think, living is a political act if you if you really want to go like deeply philosophical about it. So the choices you make as an artist are already political acts. So you don't have to be politically outspoken. You don't have to send precise political or purely political messages. But the kind of art that you decide to make and the messages that come across, or the feelings that this art you create evokes in other people, is already a political act. So it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be politically vocal.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I suppose you don't have to be explicit in your messaging, but
no. I have to say, I don't really think that the messaging. This is what I'm saying. Like, I don't believe that the messaging should be explicit. I mean, like, also, like, look at the history of techno, or like the origins in Detroit. These people, some of them were explicitly political, but the political act in them doing what they do was exactly what they decided to do. That was a political act. They were like, okay, we are not going to conform we're not going to stay.
Yeah, it relates to who they were and where they were from, and just that in itself is a message.
Yes, exactly. And they just decided, okay, we're just not gonna stay in this position that we are placed in. We're gonna define our own position, and we're gonna make and create our own thing. And this was a political rebellion, that they didn't conform.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, that is, yeah, I guess not conforming, of the sort of rebellion against whatever prevailing culture it is in your surroundings is, it's the history of, I was going to say rock and roll, but this counterculture generally, and that has been most commonly expressed in music, like post the Second World War, post the 1960s. Music has been at the bleeding edge of that for most of that period. How do you feel about artists who seem to make this a center part of their messaging? But there's a lot of people, I feel like, particularly who have emerged in the last few years, who do this, and it's seemingly that is how they define themselves, but in a very kind of performative sort of a way. and in a way which kind of makes me feel slightly cynical about the way they're approaching. I mean, have you detected that at all in the development of the broader scene?
Yeah, I absolutely detected it. And also, I mean, I have a similar reaction to yours. It does almost make me cynical about it, especially with my background, where I actually was born and raised in a hyper-political environment. And I developed myself as a person and as a performer, as a DJ, and like professionally and personally in a super like hyper-political circumstances. So yeah, for me, some of these perspectives are quite naive. Some are performative. It depends on the person and the way they do it. What I want to say, like, I would just like to continue from the previous answer. Let's say in an example of music. So you have, let's say you live in a very tense, like super tense environment, super tense political or social environment, and you're a DJ. Your political act can be the style of music you play. What kind of feeling you will evoke in people? Will you give them relief from that situation that they found themselves in? Or will you create more tension? And I think this can also be a political act without explicitly being political. That's what I wanted to say. This is an example of what I wanted to say in my previous answer. And talking about like the general trend in the last few years to be like vocally political and explicitly political, I think there's probably a crisis of meaning or a crisis of some sort of existential crisis that is collectively happening in especially the DJ scene or electronic music scene. So people have this need to give certain things a meaning in a forced kind of manner, if you know what I mean. I think this is where it comes from. It's the scene is just so hedonistic. Everything is available. Anyone can be a DJ. Anyone can have an agenda. Everyone can do everything. It's just a matter of choice. So there is no tension. Like if everything is available, if everything is easy, if everything is possible, then there is no tension, and this is not natural. This is not how humans are made in a pure biological sense, and then people create this tension, and people appoint meanings to things to feel better about themselves and to feel as if what they're doing has some greater sense of purpose. But like the way they will do it also depends on their background, depends on the social circumstances they are in. Some topics become trendy and then everyone jumps on the same train. There's a lot of virtue signaling. There's a lot of hypocrisy. But I don't know. I mean, I'm really like full of love and tolerance towards everyone. So I'm like, okay, I understand where this is coming from. I don't necessarily agree with it. I don't have to like it. I don't have to be that way. For me, coming where I come from and having this personal history, I'm a zero bullshit kind of person. So I'm actually quite sensitive to it. But I also understand where this comes from and how it happens and why people are like that. And it did become a kind of people monetize it. I mean, not in
Sure,
like actual financial sense, but they have like it's like social monetizing, and apparently it has become a currency in a way.
Well, I think it's part of a sort of brand building strategy for a lot of people, you know, to look at it at a really kind of cynical level.
Actually, yes, also that. I mean, the corporations, big corporations and big brands are behaving in the same way, so why not DJs?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's absolutely right. And I think a lot of it is to do with trying to, you know, at a very broad level, people try and, you know, differentiate themselves and separate themselves into different groups, and then try and stand apart from the crowd within those groups, right? So, I mean, a topic that I wanted to get back to was your own DJing career and how you've managed to build that in the context of, you know, the last few years and the changes in the scene. But also, you know, as someone who doesn't necessarily have a, you know, defined sound as a DJ, you know, like you play all kinds of different stuff, and like, you know, I wouldn't be able to predict with any high degree of certainty what you were going to play when you know, stepped up to the decks at any particular party. So, I mean, how, like, taking it back to just, you know, your own musical sort of journey and the way you are now, like, how do you approach that side of sort of building your career over time?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's funny what you say about genres, because the last gig I played, I actually played drum and bass in the last half an hour, and this is the first time I've ever even tried doing that, but it just happened. Somehow it happened. Yeah, I guess in that sense, when we talk about music genres and styles, which is something I hate talking about, and I hated talking about it and writing about it when I was a journalist, I'm a very old school kind of DJ. I just, you know, play music. So I don't necessarily need to be put in a box or associated with certain style or a certain party brand or a certain label. And I guess I have to say that's the harder way to do things. It's much easier to build yourself as a brand, as you said, and like any other brand, you need to define exactly, you know, the look and feel, and then you say, okay, I'm this person, I'm playing dark techno, I'm wearing black, I have tribal tattoos, I have this kind of haircut, or I'm a happy house DJ and I wear colorful clothes, and flyers for my party are like all flowers and butterflies. You know what I mean? So it's like you need to stick to that brand. For me, I actually, I guess it's also this personal trajectory where I was changing my positions, or let's say professions within the music industry, but also I did other stuff as well. I just, for my whole life, I kind of fought to be outside of the box. And when this international DJing thing took off, I didn't have a strategy. I just knew that I want to get out of Serbia and I wanted to play internationally, and I believed in myself, and I believed that I'm a good enough DJ to get gigs internationally and to get some international recognition. But as I said, coming from where I come from, I couldn't even make a plan or make a strategy because it was completely unknown to me, like this kind of approach. And I had like zero strategy. I was just being myself, whatever I am. And I did whatever I felt was right in the moment. And I guess my position within the scene is very unique in that sense, because there are not many people who manage to do so in that way. It's also partly because of my growing up in Serbia. So when we go back to the 90s, and these DJs and radio shows and parties that actually defined me, really, it was just people played all sorts of music also on the radio, and among the, like youngsters and urban crowd or people who were into music, it was never really cool to follow just one style or one genre. It was actually considered quite uncool. Like you were considered to be narrow-minded, and if you are into music and if you want to present yourself as a music lover or an expert, it was actually needed to follow all sorts of music, rock, alternative. When you talk to people in Serbia, like who are music lovers and knowledgeable, they know everything about every genre, and that was the atmosphere right. that I grew up with. So I had this uncle who was a music lover and who had a huge record collection, and he was also part of that generation where just you had to know everything, and this is why I could never really define my style, because I liked all sorts of music. But as you said, I also never really associated myself with a certain clique or a certain party brand or a certain label. I mean, obviously I was, and I'm still working with the agency that inherited Dystopian, and Dystopian was connected with this with Dystopian label. But from the start, it was very obvious that I'm not a Dystopian DJ. I can play. I could play techno, and I did play techno, but it was not that kind of style. And I think also the agency that I joined decided to broaden their. To broaden like the DJs or the styles that they represent once they took me on. And obviously, like in Berlin, I play Panorama Bar all the time, and that's the club I played the most. So, but I'm still not super associated with Berghain or Panorama. I don't feel like I'm not, Marcel Detman or Ben Klock, who are like, they're like the poster boys for Berghain. So it was, I have to say, it was a more difficult path to take, because sometimes for promoters is also kind of hard. Like they don't know where to place me. Should they put me on a house stage in a festival or a techno stage in a festival?
People want to put you in a box, right? That's what everyone wants.
Yeah, it's easier. And I mean, you have certain DJs or certain party brands that are literally like McDonald's. They're literally like, when you go to that party, you know exactly what to expect. The Big Mac, Big Mac tastes the same in every country, in every city. And some of these collectives are doing exactly that. But for me, it would be boring. I just cannot do the same thing all over and over again. And yeah, I'm somehow managed. But I have to say, what I've noticed over the years is that people who support me and who respect me and who like me really respect me exactly for that reason, because I somehow kept my integrity and I was just always being honest, and I never played any kind of like marketing game, which not everyone can do it. Like it actually means that you represent yourself as yourself. For some people, it's much easier to make this, to divide their their private life, or let's say their private persona from the public persona, or whatever they represent as performers or artists. For me, I could not be so professional and so strategic about it. So I was just being who I am, and it somehow worked out. I'm really happy about the connections I created and nurtured over the years internationally, because people that keep on booking me all over and over again are people that I really, really like. I'm like, oh, I'm really happy that this festival supports me and keeps booking me, because I really like these promoters. Like I would be friends with them even if they were in a different industry. So yeah, it's double-edged sword. It's a bit harder. Maybe, I don't know if with this approach, if I would like talk to some young DJs starting now, I would not be able to promise them that with this approach you can achieve great heights in terms of career. I think if you want to be like super, super successful and one of those like top DJs, you really need to define yourself as a brand and build your career as a brand. So, and it's not new. This thing is like, this is not new. We have this in pop culture, music culture, and history of electronic music since forever. I mean, look at Richie Hawtin and his career. He built himself as a brand from the very start, with a logo, with the Plastic Man thing, with a haircut, with a black color, with a certain sound he's associated with, experiments in technology and blah, blah. And he always sticks to what he built as a, this Richie Hawtin / Plastic Man persona.
Yeah, I mean, it's marketing. It's marketing, right? And this goes back to the very start of the music industry as we know it today. And it's just the way, it's just the way capitalism works really at a really broad level. It's a product and you're selling a product, right? And, when people say you're building yourself as a brand, as a performer, well, I mean, you're in a marketplace and you're trying to
sell.
Yeah, exactly. You're selling something. And that's a really painful way of looking at it, right? And, having the kind of approach that you've just described is still a way of perpetuating yourself as a performer, right? So it is a strategy, like even if it is not like explicit in the way that's, you just described Richie. And that's just a classic example of something which has been, I mean, it's easy from the outside to kind of assume that there was a high degree of planning there, but yeah, you're absolutely right to point out stuff like the logo, the personal image and all the rest of it. And I think now for young people coming in, like I think there is an assumption that you have to do that. And that some degree of expertise, or at least that's something that you should take very seriously, and almost, I mean, there's a danger of, as someone, who's been around for a few years, there's a danger of kind of assuming that takes precedence over music, right? And I'm not sure if that's fair. Like, to be honest, I think it's a kind of easy trap to fall into as a kind of someone who's been around the block a few times, to assume that the younger generation don't take the things that you took seriously enough. They don't take them seriously enough. But I mean, I don't know how you feel about that generally. I mean, like, do you feel that there's been a general kind of coarsening of the approach, if I can put it like that, of younger people coming in?
Yeah, I can feel that. I can agree to it to a certain extent, but I also have to say that it's also very natural, because this industry, obviously, I mean, let's say 20 years ago or 30 years ago, being a DJ and electronic music scene and industry was something that was still like quite fresh and quite new. And I guess no one even believed or suspected that it will survive this long. And it's very obvious that this kind of it's also a lifestyle. It's not only like consuming music, and it's not just about music and music genres and styles or music expressions. I would say that this lifestyle and this style of gathering and this kind of music events, and then also music creation and music consumption, is something that is here to stay. It doesn't seem as if Like it's actually, I would say it's developing just more and more. And you have like less and less bands touring, and, you know, less people releasing albums. And I'm pretty sure that like major labels are also struggling a lot. So what I want to say is that like people who are younger and let's say fresh generations, maybe they are just not repeating the mistakes that we've made. We can also look at it. We can also look at it that way. They've learned. They've learned from past mistakes of other people, and now they have different tools. Like tools are just completely different than the tools that we had, and they are using it. And also, like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 13 years ago, there were not that many slots that you could take as a DJ or electronic music artists. Yep. There were not that many opportunities. It was a very narrow market. And now there's like a variety of options, and people are just going for it. I want to say it's more possible than ever to make a career out of it and to make a living out of it. And for some people, it's possible to make like huge amounts of money. I mean, let's not pretend that it's all about music. It's just not. I mean, the moment you want to make a living out of it, you need to think strategically, I guess. And this is what younger generations understand from the start. For like, let's say for me, it wasn't apparent from the start. I could not see it. I was a singer. I was singing in choirs, and I went to like classical or opera singing classes. And I stopped all the singing when I was a teenager or in my early 20s because I was convinced I would never be able to make a living with music. I mean, life proved me wrong, which I'm really happy about, but I could not see myself. And now it's just different. People see it. People see that there's a market over there. People see that there's a lot of people in this world who are ready to spend money on parties and music, and they just want to take their position, and they are using all the tools that are available. We can like it or not, but this is what's happening. It's I don't want to look at it just negatively, and of course, like going back to my beginnings and my story and my experiences and what I had to do in order to get, you know, one international gig, and let alone hundreds. I mean, the price I had to pay and the work I had to invest and the patience I had to invest is unmeasurable, like uncomparable to what people do these days. But I can't cry over it because it's just different times. It's like different times, exactly. And I was in a different position. I was, you know, if you want to grow oranges, you don't do it in Finland. You know, you grow oranges in Greece. If you want to be a DJ, you don't do it in Macedonia. I mean, Macedonia is not even the worst example. Like, if you want to be a DJ, you cannot be from Congo. You know what that is true. I can't think of any. You know what I mean? Like, if you want to be a fashion designer, do you think you can make a career if you're in Peru? Like, no, you need to go to Paris. And this is what happened to me. Like, I was somewhere else. I was actually even happy that my city had this scene and this heritage and a lot of DJs. But what I want to say, this is my personal story. And it was like that moment in time. And I just cannot blame other people that because they're born in a different moment in time and they're starting their careers in a different moment in time. Obviously, the motives are different now, like back in the days. And I hate being that person who talks about back in the days, I have to say. But back in the days, really, people were... It was more about music because it had to be more about music. And now the context is different. So now it obviously doesn't have to be all about music. And that's just how it is.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's just different, isn't it? And that's just the reality. Yeah, reality you have to accept.
But I have to say, like, if we want to somehow pass our experience and our knowledge and our knowledge and experience to younger generations, we have to stop perceiving them as enemies. We just need to find ways to develop a conversation, and we need to find channels to spread this knowledge and to educate. And this is like, education is the key. And if everyone just backs up and gives up, and if everyone is like, just so disappointed that they don't want to participate anymore, they're actually participating and contributing to this new approach that they don't like. So I think it's the responsibility of generations who know better and who experience better, or who want certain values to still exist within our industry or within our scene. They simply need to speak out loud and spread their message and educate the youngsters. That's the responsibility.
Yeah, I totally agree. With you. Okay, so this has been awesome. I've just got one more question. It's not even really a question, to be honest. It's just something I did last week, and I had a couple of people ask me to do it every time. So you're a great DJ, but tell me a few of your favorite DJ mixes that were influential on you, or you just enjoyed.
Well, I'm ready for this question because someone on Twitter asked this, and
yeah, I think that's what was behind the good feedback.
Right? Yeah, someone on Twitter asked this, and I was like, wow, this is a good question. And yeah, for me, it was, one of the best mixes of all times is James Holden at the controls. That's like the number one mix that that influenced me. But there are certain others. There's a lot of like DJ Kicks mix that are very influential. Obviously the Kruder and Dorfmeister one, and I really like the Chicken Lips DJ Kicks, and then around the same time when At the Controls came out, or maybe like 1 or 2 years earlier, it was Erland Oye, and he had an interesting one. And then Miss Kitten at Sonar, but I forgot which year it was. She played Windelicker. It's like this generation of DJs, and around that time, those mixes. But I have to say, James Holden at the controls, number one.
Okay. Cool. Well, yeah, thank you so much for doing this. It's been great.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. We talked way too much about politics, and I thought this would be a conversation about music and scene, but I guess talking to me always leads into this political direction a little bit more.
Well, I think we managed to bring it back to music in most cases. So yeah, it was great. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
Music, not diving, with Scuba.